So what you're seeing here, obviously we have building and plan, building and plan, building and plan, and now we have a Dark Souls building. But what's interesting about Dark Souls is that there is no plan. Dark Souls does not have a plan. It does not work with a plan. There is no map. So there's no plan. If there's no plan and there's no map, then what do we have? The answer is Weenies. Weenies. This is the architecture of Dark Souls. If anyone's been watching my stuff for a while now, they'll know that I'm a massive fan of Dark Souls, and that I believe Dark Souls is highly architectural. As always, I have a big, complex Miro board here that we're going to get through, and we're going to kick things off just by giving a slight overview for Dark Souls this week. So Dark Souls is a video game that was released in 2011, and in many ways it's the spiritual sequel to Demon's Souls, released in 2009. Demon's Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, Sekiro are all part of the Soulsborne genre, and the architect of this genre is none other than Hidetaka Miyazaki. The games are infamous for being ridiculously opaque and challenging, and you die quite a lot playing these games, but the reward for conquering these games is like none other in gaming. And I do think there are some comparable experiences in the real world that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Ultimately, Dark Souls is what I call a complex challenge. And I think if you're in any way gravitated to architecture and architecture school, then complex challenges are very much for you. So I want to really talk about what makes this complex challenge so special by really just talking about the architecture of it. So we know what it is. We know who made it. Obviously, Hidetaka Miyazaki had an incredible team working with him. We're going to talk about them shortly. And really now I'm going to talk about what the architecture is. So, okay, on first glance, we have the architect and we have the architecture. If I were to describe Dark Souls as a dark fantasy RPG, you're probably imagining the images that I'm showing you right now. Dark, spooky cathedrals, bonfires, dragons, dungeons, towers, crypts. Everything's wet, everything's scary, everything's dark, everyone has a British accent. You're correct. Dark Souls is all of those things. But really, I mean, this is just the architecture of the game in a physical sense. Like, what does it look like? And you can see here, I've just included that obviously a lot of the environments in Dark Souls were inspired by real world locations. I'm not going to go too much into these really, but I mean, we've cathedrals in Milan with Anne Orlando, the Undead Parish with the Lava Church in Mexico, the Duke's Archive with the Peabody Library. You kind of get the gist, right? So obviously, there has been some architectural research carried out in the production and the design of this game. But I'm less interested in talking about what the architecture looks like, and I'm much more interested in talking about how the architecture makes you feel. And that's what I really want to talk about today. So I've just sort of pulled out 4 little stills here from 4 different environments. I think we have Firelink Shrine, Anne Orlando, New Londo Ruins, and Sen's Fortress. And I've really just put these 4 words down here because really what makes Dark Souls so unique is that players really do feel the spaces. They create memories within the spaces, and when they revisit the spaces evoke an emotion. And I think that's one of the most fascinating psychological aspects of Dark Souls. So again, you see here you've got fear, curiosity, wonder, relief. Anyone who's ever visited Firelink Shrine, which we're going to talk about in a second, knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that's the real reason why Dark Souls has sort of penetrated and broken into the mainstream of video game culture and pop culture beyond. It's that it's so memeable. If you've played it once, you've shared an experience with millions of other people. And I think that's what makes the memes so good. So for example, I'm really interested in the idea of the Dark Souls toilet. This was probably the least graphic version of this meme that I could share on this Miro board, but I think you understand what I'm getting at. The idea of every time you arrive into each of the spaces in Dark Souls, shit's gonna go down. Dark Souls is the complex challenge when it comes to video games, and conquering it really is something that I think is personally impressive. So if you can beat Dark Souls, you've got my respect. But let's get into it a little bit further. What I'm saying here is that I spoke about this in the Rothko video previously, the idea that the very best architecture can make you feel something. And I've just pulled out a few examples here again I just wanted to talk about. Buildings that are of course physical, but are much more about the feelings that they inspire within the user. So we've got some Thermval by Peter Zumthor. We're looking at some scale, monumentality here. I think this is Arvina. Some Alto, some Sohn, some Liebskin. I just think this is really interesting. So if we accept that architecture, both physical and virtual, can make somebody feel something, how do you achieve this feat? And I want to get into that now by looking at the actual architecture of Dark Souls. So, long way of saying we're here. Okay, when we're analyzing and studying architecture, we often have the plan almost as a companion or a section, a drawing of sorts that allow us to experience the space, but also analyze the space and navigate the space and understand the space, either before the fact or after the fact. So what you're seeing here, obviously, we have building and plan, building and plan, building and plan, and now we have a Dark Souls building. But what's interesting about Dark Souls is that there is no plan. Dark Souls does not have a plan. It does not work with a plan. There is no map. There is just the experience of exploring the space. So there's no plan. If there's no plan and there's no map, then what do we have? The answer is weenies. Weenies? A weenie is a term that was first coined by Walt Disney. But really, the weenie is a sort of architectural move of sorts that has existed long before Walt Disney. The weenie is one of my favorite terms in game design. And really what it means is a weenie is something that exists in a landscape or in a city that allows a user to sort of locate themselves at all times within it. So if you think of an obelisk in a European city, or you think of a monument like the Arc de Triomphe and how all sort of boulevards flow to it, or even just a structure in a beautiful landscape. This is the Woodland Cemetery in Stockholm. These are all weenies. There he is, Walt Disney. Big Walt wanted to use weenies as a way for users to find their way around Disneyland. So for example, a weenie in Disneyland would be the castle. Cinderella's castle is a good example of a weenie. Or there would be a series of markers in these theme parks that would allow people to navigate the theme parks without ever feeling lost at any time. This concept of the weenie exists in video games also. So you'll see it in open world games such as Breath of the Wild. Skyrim has weenies, but also Dark Souls has weenies. And what's really interesting about Dark Souls is that Dark Souls uses architecture as a method of wayfinding and signage. You'll always know where you are in Dark Souls based on the architecture that is visible to you in Dark Souls. And I think that's incredibly interesting and special. Especially considering there's no map and there's no plan. So we're going to talk about the navigation of it now in just a second, but really what I'm trying to say here is that Dark Souls was designed for exploration, and when you're playing Dark Souls, you are the explorer, Dora the Explorer. I find it bizarre that a game made in 2011 doesn't have a map, considering that video games have a very famous history with maps. I mean, we've got Super Mario World Level, we've got Pokemon Level, we've got Resident Evil Level, Grand Theft Auto, etc. So for Dark Souls to not have a map signals to me that, okay, then this world must be designed within an inch of itself to allow a user, a player, to navigate it effectively. I want to just bring your attention to a number of maps that do exist. So these maps that we're looking at here are almost diagrams of sorts that I believe are highly architectural, but have been created by fans and have been created by artists, essentially. And yeah, I mean, this is an incredible diagram. I believe this is by U and P, and they run I believe they run a virtual architectural design unit at the Bartlett. But what I'm getting at here is that there's a level of spatial complexity within Dark Souls that can't actually be captured in a map. It just can't be. And isn't that incredible? Like, I find that amazing. So what do we have then, and how do we navigate Dark Souls? Well, my hypothesis for this video is that the architecture is the map. And I'm going to talk about this now. What you're seeing here now is the map of Dark Souls, which is the game, which is the 3D model. And I have access to that model here now that we can sort of look at and we can explore. And I mean, the first thing that stands out really is how unbelievably large this game world is. I mean, what we're looking at here at the moment is the sort of beginning point of the game, you know. the Undead Asylum, where the game begins. But even from the Undead Asylum, I mean, we still have spaces above us, and we have locations below us. And when the game begins, and you complete the tutorial in the Undead Asylum, you're teleported to the hub world of the game, which is, as many of you probably already know, is Firelink Shrine. Firelink Shrine becomes the home base for the entire experience. Like, Firelink Shrine is the hub. It's your home. It's where you belong. But from Firelink Shrine, you're pretty much free to go up, or if you're brave, to go down. And that gives Dark Souls this open world quality to it that actually doesn't really exist physically. It actually more so exists vertically, in that you can go as far up as you want or as far down as you want based on how brave you really are. And that's what gives Dark Souls this incredible explorative quality. Like, how brave are you? How far do you want to go? How many risks are you willing to take? Because this is a dangerous, scary environment that you need to traverse. We can see the model now in its entirety. The game's big. But how does it work spatially? For the purpose of this video, I've kind of broken it into 3 categories. Compression and release, loop, and verticality. I'm going to talk about each of these now. So consider these the 3 architectural moves used throughout Dark Souls to guide a user through a space without the map. Compression and release is a very, maybe it's unfair to say, but I think it's a very basic architectural principle. It should be taught to you in architecture school quite early, and we see it time and time again in a lot of the most famous buildings. The Pantheon, for example, Ando's Church of the Light, Villa Savoie, Thurnval. And ultimately all it is it's a technique used by architects to make the scale of a grand space even greater by compressing a user through a tight space first. You should be seeing the video here now. And this happens not just within the first 30 minutes of Dark Souls, but throughout the 20-hour runtime of Dark Souls. This trick, compression and release, happens time and time and time again. You're ushered through a tight, relentless hallway to be released into a beautiful, grand space. And this just stood out to me when I first played Dark Souls, just how architectural it was. Now, this idea of compression and release isn't new to video games. I mean, I'm showing some examples here on my screen. The idea of the squeeze through loading screen is pretty trendy. I mean, we've been seeing it in video games now for the last 15 years. But what's interesting about Dark Souls is that in games such as Mass Effect with the elevator, or God of War with the tight spaces, or Tomb Raider even with the little corridors, compression and release is sort of used as a technique to achieve the effect that I'm discussing, where you can make a grand space feel more significant by bringing someone through a tight space first. But in these instances, the tight space, the compressed space, is used to hide a loading screen so the environment beyond the tight space can load into the game. But Dark Souls doesn't need to do that, which I find really interesting, which means that in the case of Dark Souls, compression and release is used in a pure architectural sense. Just to jump back to the map here, you can see that here. So when we arrive from Firelink Shrine and we come up through this aqueduct is narrow and tight. Then there's a staircase that we run up, which is narrow and tight, and we arrive in the Undead Burg. And you might be seeing this on the screen now. And this little trick happens time and time and time again in Dark Souls. Like, the designers of Dark Souls are just masters of compression and release. And it just makes the game world feel so big all of the time. Much bigger than the 3D model that we're looking at right now. The second architectural principle that I like to discuss is what I call the loop. I love this meme because it really does just sort of explain how the Dark Souls level trick works. You start in one space, you move to a second space, you go to a third space, then you unlock an elevator or a staircase or a pathway that takes you back to the first level. Only you arrive at the original level from a point that you weren't aware of to begin with. I've talked at length about loops in another video on this channel, the Dark Souls of Architecture. You should be able to find that on this channel, where I compare Dark Souls to the Stone Museum. You can see in these little diagrams here. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention, because if you want me to talk, if you want to hear more about what I think about loops and spirals, you can check out that video now. The third architectural principle that I want to discuss, though, is verticality. This is just a stunning illustration. I will put the name of the artist in the description for this video, but really what they try to capture is the vertical scale of the entire game of Dark Souls. I think you can see here, this is Firelink Shrine, where you almost begin and you have so much above and so much below. And I really want to sort of redraw this map with some screenshots here that we can look at. And how each of these environments, Firelink Shrine, with New Orlando above, and Ash Lake all the way at the bottom, below Blight Town and Lost Izalith, each have their own distinctive colour, which is just beautiful. It would be amazing to see like a sectional drawing of this entire map. But just the idea that you've got cities and cities built on top of one another, ruins on top of cities. But I don't believe that this map, as beautiful as it is, really does the whole world justice. I think you really got to look at the level itself. If we just zoom out, I mean, look how big and complex this is. Like, this is amazing. Like, this is like one of my favorite pieces of architectural design. And I don't know how many architects actually know about it. I mean, you've just got like the buttresses of old castles and ruins, with all of these really complicated circulation routes. And from below, you can always see above. And just when you think you're at the bottom, you're not. It turns out there's more. There's roots and trees. Look how crazy this is. And you go lower and lower and lower. And then there's like an abandoned lake at the very base of it all. Look at this. Okay, but why does any of this matter? I mean, it's because I just think video games can teach you quite a lot about architecture. I think architects should play more video games, and especially Dark Souls. Dark Souls, in my opinion, is like the architectural video game. And I just think more people need to play it. So, that's it. That's the architecture of Dark Souls. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you liked it, if you wanted to see something different, what you want to see next week. And as always, thank you very much. All the best, and goodbye.